Okay, I'm not going to go into detail on this. That this is really a little bit for Belinda Carr in case she's like really miffed at me and thinks that I'm like trying to steal her subscriber base, which I'm not. I mean, she's the professional in her area, and I'm not really a professional in any area. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, but a master of some, or a bit more than most guys can be a jack of all trades at. Let's just say that I've come to the realization, looking back on my life, that I'm a specific puzzle piece. Let's say that I could fit in a number of different areas, and because I have learning differences, I can't really get degrees, so people can't train me in certain areas, and it really doesn't make much sense for me to even try that at my age, to be like a professional in every case, because how much of the stuff that you actually educate yourself on to get licensed and to become a professional is even applicable, maybe a year or two after, and then you have to get recertified. And I just, to me, this kind of uncertainty that people have, or lack of trust they have in their employee base, is a good reason to pretty much not be employed. Yeah, and I've had these discussions with tech people. I've said, how much you think, if Moore's law says things double in capacity and speed every year in the computer industry, and you work in tech and your business people, have basically no concept of reality in determining how fast you're supposed to be able to produce stuff, and they put pressure on you all the time and stresses you out. What's the likelihoods that you're going to continue being a tech person, or are you going to get retired and go off and become a rock star? And the guy I was talking to said, yeah. So the likelihood is, yeah, the tech industry sucks, and it's usually because your business types don't have any clue about technology, and what they do is they look at other they're looking at points of reference, and their points of reference is the simple idea that technology seems to double all the time. So their pressure on you doubles all the time, and the pressure on them doubles all the time, because people has the expectation that all technology and software and everything doubles all the time. In 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 every software developer knows that that's not the case, and the reason why Moore's law is that way, somebody should have informed more that the reason why things double like that in the industry has to do with the lithographic processes of creating chips. You create a chip using a light that it's kind of a photographic process, and um, it actually, because photographic processes actually are adjusting little flakes of silver in there whenever you're working with black light photographs. It's actually manipulating material, and that's what they do with the chips. They image the chips, and it's actually manipulating the substrate, and where the wiring is going to go, and they have like little robotic things that do all the wiring of these things, set the wiring in place or put the diodes or whatever it is, and it's a photographic process. And the level of the amount of detail you put on these chips, or whatever it is that you're doing to create the chips, um, depends upon the scale at which they can work with the and the smaller it gets, the faster it goes, and the more, and if you have gotten the smallest that you can ever get your circuits, then you start duplicating the circuits, like making two circuit boards for the chips, and then four, and then 16, and then 32, and then when you've exhausted that, then you put in multiple processors into the same computer. But they usually try to put all the processors into the chip, but that makes the chip bigger. And so the the thing is that they haven't been able to get past the 3 gigahertz limit on the chips because it has to do with physical limitations of what happens when you've got electrons bouncing around inside the chip, and they might break through a wall and jump over the circuit into another circuit, and then you have a short circuit. You have a chance for a state cycle, chance for a core dump. That the computer's going to fail to work. And people who overclock computers because what the clock does is it guarantees the integrity of a computation, given enough time for the electron or the power to propagate across all the circuits necessary, because it doesn't know. I mean, there's no way of knowing how long. I mean, it depends upon the most complex, or how, I guess it's how long it takes to get across the entire board, is the propagation determines the clock cycle. But if you increase that clock cycle really a whole lot, then it's going to be sending out lots of bunches of power, and it may not get completely across the circuit, and then you're just going to start having errors in computation. You'll have a crash, and if it does that enough, it might overheat the circuit, and so it blows the circuit. And that's the reason why all these people overclock their machines, and then they end up, with toasted circuits and stuff, is because they're thinking this is really cool. It's a kind of a male thing to do, kind of see how far you can go. And the people who are novices at this need to keep in mind, the people that make the technology, makes the chips and all that stuff, probably put little policies in there that if you overclock this, you're completely responsible for it. We are not. You're going outside the bounds of what's possible, and you're going to destroy your electronics. And the people that run the computer shops don't give a rat's ass one way or another. They're going to give you the rope to hang yourself with. They're going to give you the potential to use up a lot of money just to satisfy your desire to be number one in your game computing community, because you think that by making it a lot faster, you're going to be able to kick more butt. And the reality is that there's this one kid over there that's really clever, and he can kick everybody's butt at 15 frames per second on, his ditzy little computer, and nobody can ever figure out how to get around it because he just tends to be really clever. So anyhow, I'm one of those clever kids, by the way, or thinks I've got my butt kicked too, but I tend to navigate around things when I can. My whole life I've been flanking pretty much everything. And that's how you play. That's how you play video games, is because the maps are limited. You can always you can flank. You can't go really outside the map, but you can go up the edge of the map and get behind the enemy. That's one of the favorite things. And if you see anybody doing it, in one of my ways of fighting that problem was basically getting rid of all the trees. And there was a game, it was Battlefield Bad Company 2, and one of the things you could do is toss C4. And so I tossed C4 at trees and take down multiple trees. In Battlefield 3, I used to use a MAV to take down trees. You can use MAV to kill people. I also used it to nudge snipers off of the top. They'd get up there on that certain map that had that big old tall antenna tower, and they'd get up there and they'd start sniping on people. I'd take my MAV up there and I'd push them off, and they'd wonder, how did somebody get up here? And because I took a plane up here, parachuted down, and I was sitting here, and then all of a sudden I'm dead. And you can use a MAV to drop. It was a lot of fun, and that's gives you some glimpse into kind of just the kind of fun I like to have in my own free time. And if I was to say that in an interview, then people would say, well, we don't want you working for us because you like to have fun. Keep in mind that when you have fun, you're relieving stress, and your cognitive ability goes up. But if you stress your employees all the time, then their cognitive ability goes down. They make more mistakes, and then you stress more, and they make more mistakes. And during COVID, we noticed the extreme form of what this did. I would say that a lot of the people that were already stressed died instantly. They had heart attacks when they found out about COVID. Other people turned into zombies and went to grocery stores and could not hear the cashier as they were buying their stuff. You know, they didn't hear anything. They didn't hear anybody. They were in a trance. That's because that's the fight or flight response. Whenever you're stressed, you suppress your immune system, and you suppress your immune system. And I'll keep talking about this. I've talked about it in every video. Suppress your immune system, cognitive ability. Did I say immune system? And tissue regrowth and reproduction, according to Robert Sapolsky, who's done 3 years research. He's an atheist, but he's got a son and a daughter who have biblical names, Rachel and Benjamin. Benjamin means son of my right hand, or is it left hand? Anyhow, so let's get back to this. Said, I know Ton Rosendahl was one of the 40 flown out to beta test Game Blender. And go to ask Ton. He knows me. Go ask go ask Bart Veldhusen. He also knows me. So the 2 points of reference there. Ton might say, I don't know him. And I said, Ton, I know your significant other. Do you want me to tell everybody? Do you want me to tell everybody about your significant other? And he'll probably back down on that one, but I'll just go ahead. Game Blender in Amsterdam in 2000. Been using Blender since 1.18 on the SGIs. Ton made Blender because he was faced with the dilemma of either purchasing a SGI computer or Wavefront, the advanced visualizer. This could be damning to Blender. I'm sorry. But I think that it's so big that the cat's out of the bag that no matter what happens, Autodesk couldn't do a damn thing about this. It's the source code's already out there. Somebody's going to get influenced by it, and the advanced visualizer. It's really the same sort of story with what Steve Jobs did whenever he got to look at the Smalltalk environment that that Xerox PARC had and Xerox had, and they were really just asking them, how are we going to market and sell this thing? Can you get, as a consultant, could you tell us if you could create this computer and blah, blah, blah. And he probably said, no, there's no way you can ever market this. And then he went off and created the Macintosh, which is basically the same, inspired yeah. And you know, you probably know about Microsoft's story is that they had, what's his name, Gary Kildall, and CPM, and his wife wouldn't give them the time of day, and they ended up going with number 2, Bill Gates. So, and what did Bill Gates do? He said, yeah, we can do your operating system, IBM. And IBM said, great. And according to Pirates of Silicon Valley and other sources of information, like, which was probably Triumph of the Nerds by X Kringley, that probably inspired Pirates of Silicon Valley because it predates it. It was an early 90s PBS documentary. It came in 3 parts. And in it said that after they had done the deal with IBM to come up with the PC-DOS operating system, turned to Paul Allen and said, Paul, do you know of anybody that's got something that's like CPM? Says, oh yeah, there's this guy in Seattle on the other side that's got something called Quick and Dirty DOS. In fact, in the Triumph of the Nerds, they got the guy in there who tells you about what he was doing. And he basically kind of figured out what CPM was doing, and he created his own kind of CPM-like operating system. And then Microsoft just took that and turned it into an operating system. Now, keep in mind, all Microsoft was at that time is a company that created basic interpreters. They weren't into operating systems. This little deal made them into an operating system company. See, that's how you do it. And so, I'm just giving you the basics there. So anyhow, what I was saying is Ton Tun made the blender because he was faced with the dilemma of either purchasing an SGI computer or Wavefront, the advanced visualizer, which is a third of Maya, or the other two are TDI Explorer, which is in England. It Wavefront was in California, and Alias Power Animator was in Toronto. And so Alias Power Animator was the other third. Alias was used in T2, by the way. That was the thing that created the reflective pseudopod in the Abyss and created that guy that was running and all this stuff. That was Alias. Wavefront was used to do some skeletal animation in that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the one where he goes to Mars and stuff, and then they go to this area where there's this panel, and it's got an X-ray, and you can see the police following him, and he turns around. That skeletal animation was done with a package called Kinimation on Wavefront. That's the package I used to do my Rise of the Thorax animation. Anyhow, and that's what led to part of how the rigging system works inside of Maya. If you're ever working with flexors, that came from Kinimation. It had also had forward kinematics. Not forward. It had inverse kinematics, but it had history-based inverse kinematics, which means that it determines, it uses the past to determine how things work, what the joint limitations might be, or how to swing the arm whenever you're doing an uppercut, depending on what was the previous position and stuff. And if you did a number of them, like, it would do a curved based interpolation of the handle chains. And so you have a handle chain going through your object, and you're using this to move the wrist in space, and that determines, based on the joint rotations, how you're actually supposed to be orienting the arms. And at the time, all Alias was ever doing was just limited. They were not doing full handle chains. They were doing like joints, and they were probably doing between two joints, but not multiple joint. At least not to the degree that Kinimation was doing them. Kinimation was a heck of a lot easier to animate with than Power Animator, by the way. With Power Animator, you had to rig your stuff. With Kinimation, there was minimal rigging. You just drew the skeleton out. It would automatically set up the axes of the joints, and then you would have to kind of, they could have done it better for the joint constraints, and to deal with things like where the flexures went, and how to associate the skin. And flexures were really just lattices, and lattices, control lattices like they have in Blender. And I really didn't like them all that much, because there could have been a better way of doing them, and probably still a better way. There's somebody at Digital Domain who was working on a way to create more realistic rigging of humans by simulating the way muscles work, and that required creating special muscles, and then he strapped up a skeleton and made this realistic. I don't know if they're still using it. That was just sometimes they do things like that just to scare the competitors, and they don't really work on it. It's really just to put out the fiction so that other people think that, oh crap, they're up here, we can't even compete with that. It's kind of a poker move, anyhow. So Tun made a Blender because he was faced with the dilemma of either purchasing. Okay, I got that, and which was $5,000 a seat. So Wavefront TV was $5,000 a seat, and that would include things like Composer, which was a post-compositor, kind of like Flame and Flint, and like Vegas or Adobe Premiere, a compositor / a nonlinear video editor. And it's possible you could have them separate from each other, but it was all in the same. They had used it to do the kind of the particle field in their demo reel that they had the particle field for a part where the Star Trek Next Generation ship is going through this particle field and it moves away all this gas. That was done on their Dynamation and augmented with the Composer. And Composer uses nested video editing, a nested video editing nonlinear video editor, and you can in Blender you can create some strips, and then you can layer them over each other, and then you can group them all together and create a thing called a meta strip, and you can cut up that meta strip and edit it and link that all together with various effects, and then create another meta strip from that, and keep doing it as much as you want to, and that's a combination of him looking at Composer, trying out a 2 week, because they gave him a 2 week test license, or a 2 week to try out of their software. I don't think they made him sign an NDA. They just gave him a seed of it for 2 weeks, and probably because if they got an NDA, then Tun's in trouble. But I'm sure he could protect himself, because this stuff is in open source, and how are you going to put the cat back in the bag now? But then I just pointed to all that stuff about Steve Jobs and Microsoft. So this could go a lot of different ways. So anyhow, it's probably gone past the point of it being relevant in a court of law. But anyhow, by the SGI computers, as nothing did real-time grow shading, 3D rendering, nor had GPUs for doing matrix transformations, NURBS, surface curves tessellation, not even PCs at the time. Remember, SGI was the only game in town. The reason Maya was created is SGI was afraid of Microsoft. They were afraid Microsoft would corrupt the graphics industry when they bought up Softimage, or Soft Image. Keep in mind, I won a $2,000 award for Malos Wavefront in 1996. It was minimal. It was just it was basically the junior scholarship for, and it wasn't the major award that they give. It was I thought it was major, but it was really that they thought I had spent 2 years, and they thought that what had happened is that I only had, I literally only had, I took 10 years to get my bachelor's, and I was halfway through getting my bachelor's. So in a sense, technically, I was a junior in college, but I was 25, and so, or 26 whenever I applied for this, and they were expecting somebody younger. I'm sure they were probably freaked out of their gourd whenever they saw this guy coming across that was quite a bit older, but the thing is that the other guys were like kids, people that were probably before the age of 21. But I got $2,000 for this award, and somebody told me inside SGI that part of the reason why I got the award was because I had a Wavefront site, and Wavefront only had a brochure site. It didn't have any videos on it, so no demonstrations of their software. And so SGI was probably pressured Wavefront into giving me the award. I don't know. So keep in mind, $2,000 award. Which is when Bill Gates did the keynote at the Marriott at New Orleans in 1996. So I guess it's a lesson. Costly software begets eternal free open source tools, and Autodesk supposedly consults with Tun every year on what his plans are. He said this in an interview with Blender Guru. The interview is on YouTube. I suggest listening to it. His user base dwarfs Maya. Did I say I've been using Blender since 1.18? Why Blender if I used Wavefront? Wavefront pulled licensing to force me into Maya. To spite them, I picked up Blender, and I made a vendetta to ruin them by inspiring and educating people new to 3D animation and rendering. That was part of it. Part of it was that I never wanted to be involved with another tool that could just disappear out from under me. I also set up a page. Apple did this with an iPad 2 that I had. They they got me to upgrade my kernel of my operating system, and then they disabled access to GarageBand on that kernel. And I got really pissed off by that. So what I did is I set up a failware page on Facebook, and then I boosted it for about $200 to point out that Apple will actually screw you by using stuff that's not unlike what they use in the music industry. That's the yeah, you know about it. So just software licensing in general that they use in order to make money off of the the justification is that they lose money to people who pirate, but on the flip side, it's given them the capacity to force consumers into odd, awkward relationships where they lose a consumer base because people are willing to buy their old software, but they claim that they don't want to support that old software, and as a result, they don't permit you to buy a license to use the old software. The whole purpose of the license is to keep you from actually pirating or selling the software off to other people. So they're essentially losing all that competition due to software they've already sold. That's also the reason why our economy, why people are constantly in debt, and why our country is in debt is because these fucktards. Sorry to use that word, fucktards. But it's to keep you repurchasing, and whatever you've got you can't have, and you can't sell it off. So when you buy a license, that you're buying a license and you can't trade it to someone else. And now they're selling software through servers, and what you risk with a cloud server, you risk them eavesdropping on your even though they signed a policy that they wouldn't eavesdrop on you, they still could eavesdrop on you and go to another country and implement everything you have in the other country. And even if you sent lawyers over there to protect it, they probably wouldn't even recognize you and go ahead and create the whole thing and sell it off to Russia and everybody else. So our patent and copyright stuff doesn't mean shit to anybody else but in America. So that's food for thought. Anyhow, I suggest the licensee to it. The user base dwarfs Maya. Did I say I've been using Blender since 1.18? Why Blender? Okay. To spite them, blah, 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 blah. Inspiring, educating, new. Okay. The other guy leading the user community was Bart Veldhuizen. If you Google around, you'll find I submitted a deck alpha. It was really bad alpha. I couldn't do anything with it. I bought on eBay to a guy in Finland. I think he was in Finland, named Mika Sari, who that's spelled SarimikaSaari. Really nice guy. I got to meet him at the Game Blender conference when he showed up there. Who installed Linux on it and sent ton to port Blender to when Mesa OpenGL library was on Linux, put on Linux, port it to the alpha. I also made a torpedo tutorial to show how to model a within NURB surface patches and light a scene for realism using Blender and simple rendering routines that left out I said the Blender's simple rendering routines left out ray tracing. So in order to simulate radiosity and the effects of the way light works whenever you shine a bright white light on a red surface or on, well, if the sun is shining on the green grass and you're under a tree, there would be green light under the tree. Go check the Big Bunny animation to see if Tun accurately put that the radiosity or whatever it is they used accurately put the green light onto the bunny as well as the light coming from the sky. So that's radiosity, and ray tracing doesn't do anything about that. If you ray traced a tree against the grass would be green, but everything would be dark under the tree, aside from an ambient and whatever lights you had elsewhere that would be lighting stuff under the tree. So I was teaching people about how to do radiosity effects with the basic rendering that Blender had, and it didn't have ray tracing. And that was for a good reason, is that Ton didn't see any reason to put ray tracing in there if ray tracing was just going to make the computation really slow. The only time you need to use ray tracing is when you've got reflective surfaces. Is probably the only time anybody ever uses ray tracing these days, is when they're dealing with mirror surfaces. And they probably don't even use ray tracing at all. Toy Story never used any ray tracing. It was all shader rendered. So ray tracing is, and ray tracing isn't even ray tracing, it's eye tracing, because why would you trace from a light to find your eye? It's so much more effective to trace trace a line from the eye to find the light, which is what's actually being done, is that it's going for every pixel on the screen, tracing out a ray, and it's trying to find all the lights that contribute to the color of the surface that ray hits. That's real. That's computational ray tracing. The other way, though, you could do something with it valuable. Maybe my dad would do ray tracing by hand because he was a laser physicist, and it would take a long period of time to just do one ray, and he had to do this for his work. So that would be an example of doing ray tracing the other way, but it's almost the same thing as eye tracing. It's just a matter of the chance that you're going to hit the eye, or you're going to hit a light, and you could probably speed it up by doing Monte Carlo computations, controlled randomness. Anyhow, so yeah, and I talked about Toy Story, and also I said this isn't probably. I'm going to stop this video in a second here. It says no, Toy Story used absolutely no ray tracing or eye tracing. It was rendered entirely using shaders and RenderMan. It was the court case with BMRT that led NVIDIA to save BMRT's author from the expense that infringed on Pixar's sales, and is why we have shaders in our graphics cards. So there you go.